welcome to yet another video. So in this video we're going to set up our opening stock, because since this is a new account, we assume that you already have things that were already bought. So there are two ways to create openings. One, you could just come to under inventory, you just come to available stock, and since you don't have any purchases recorded yet, the system will ask you to create an opening. So when you select this button, it will pull up every item in your purchase items list, which is what we worked on in the previous video. So all these items will be made available to you for you to actually enter the quantities that you have available, either at the time of entry, or probably a stock taking you would have done in the previous day. So in my case, since I've already sold a couple of things, I went down, I went ahead to note down every item I had to start with before I started selling. So what I'm going to do is to keep this really simple and straightforward. I'm just going to come to my items sold section and then pull up a report of the items that I've sold. So I'm just going to put this here. Let me make it a bit bigger. So notice that I've already sold 8 Coca-Colas, 1 Jibu, and so on. So there is a total of 20 items that have been sold today. So it means when I enter, if I enter in my opening and say I started with 38 bottles, the system will automatically take off what I've already sold today, since I'm going to be creating an opening for the same day. Okay, so that's just a little heads up. So if the numbers look to be a bit of a mess, that's why. So like I said, you have two ways to actually set up your opening stock. You could come to purchase invoices and just enter all the invoices that have been supplied to you, which might be a bit tedious and quite hard, because the way the invoices were brought in and not the quantities that you currently have. So the best solution would be to come to available stock and say, I want to create a new opening, since this is the very first time I'm setting up inventory. So for Bell, I started off with 80 bottles. Coke, since we've already sold 8, but I knew I started off with 58. So once we create the opening, you will notice that Coca-Cola will be 50, because the 8 has already been sold today. So Jibu, I'm gonna say I started off with 62. We've only sold 1, which is this one, the 20 liter. Crest, I'm going to say I have 120. Now Special, maybe we started off with 84. Renzori boxes, the 500 milliliters. This says boxes, but so we're going to change this to actually count it in bottles. So I'm just going to enter the bottles now, but we're going to change this right after this is done, because we don't want to count boxes, since we have an option to actually sell Renzori in bottles. So we're going to say we started off with 148 bottles, and then Sprite, we had 210, and we had 56 Tusker Light. So once I have all my entries done, then I can say please create an opening. So now you have available stock available to you, and from now on deductions are going to be made. So when you look at Coke, it says we have 50 bottles. This is because we already sold 8 bottles, and remember our opening was 58, but the system recognizes the 8 that has already been sold because this stock was for the same day. I mean, the opening was for the same day, and it is the same day that these sales were made. If you didn't have any sales, you would literally have exactly the figures that you had. But it's different because of this report, and that's why I had to generate it at first just to keep track. But if you go back to purchase invoices, you now have an opening stock for 22nd of March, which is exactly what the sales report we've generated is for. And the invoice amount, of course, the total amount of items is 1.78, which is our the stock value that we started with. And these are the items we added to it. So, like I said, we were supposed to change Renzori boxes. So for Coke, we entered 58, but now the system recognizes the 50, the 8 that was sold, and that is why when you come to our available stock, Coke says we have 50 bottles. So I'm going to update this Renzori to make sure that we're counting it in bottles and not boxes. So if I come back to purchase items and I look for Renzori, I want to update this and say, please count this in bottles. So when I come back to available stock, Renzori is now in bottles. So that is how you create your opening stock. And from now on, any sale that you make, you're going to come back and notice that the quantities have been reduced. So I'm going to make an example of Jibu water. Let's sell 2 bottles where we have 61 bottles of Jibu water. So if I come to sell 2, we should see 59. So when I come to, I'm looking for an order that has Jibu. So let me create a new order and say I want to sell 2 bottles of Jibu. And I add that. Please keep note that deductions are only made after a bill has been settled. So when I confirm this and I come back to inventory under my available stock, you notice that Jibu still has 61 bottles because there's still a possibility of cancelling this and returning it to the inventory. So that's why. So if I come here and say, oh, this has now been cleared and paid, so we know it's taken. So when you come back to inventory and available stock, you notice that we now have 59 bottles of Jibu. And that's how the inventory keeps on making deductions. So what happens when we receive new stock, for example? So in the previous videos, we didn't create suppliers, but we need suppliers for these items to make sure that we keep track of who has supplied us with what, because the system at the end of the day generates a supplier statements and all that. So let's come to suppliers and create a new supplier. So I'm going to call this person Jibu, or maybe water supplier. I want to say this is the person who gives me all things to do with water. So if I create this supplier, I'm going to come to items and actually attach the items that this person supplies me with. So this is the person who gives me Jibu, and same person who gives me Renzori, since he's the water guy. So when we come back to our available stock, keep note of the Jibu. We have 59 bottles of Jibu, and Renzori has 148 bottles. So let's receive something, or let's receive water from the water supplier. So when you come to purchase invoices, I'm going to select to create a new invoice. I'm going to enter an invoice number of maybe for 6, and the supplier is water. This invoice has come in today, and now I want to add the items that I've received on this invoice. So since we added 2 items, you won't see a whole list of everything you have in store, which would be really wild. So you only see the items that you attached to a supplier. So if the same person starts to supply you with more and more things, you just go back and add those respective items to the supplier. So I want to say, Jibu, I've received maybe 12 more bottles since the pack size is 1. So we received them per item. And the unit price for each bottle is 4,000. This can be adjusted depending on the market price. You could say maybe we got it cheap at 3.8 today. So when we add that, then we're gonna have another item, Renzori. Renzori is packed in packs of 20. So if you say we received 1 pack, that makes it 20 bottles. But I'm going to say we received 40 bottles, which would be two packs. If for some reason the pack changes and it's now 22, you just update it here to be 22, which would bring the total to 44 bottles. But I'm just going to stick with 20. So if I add that, I now have 2 items on the invoice. So if I save that and come back to available stock, you'll notice that Renzori has increased by the amount we've received, and so has Jibu, from the 51 to 20 to 71, if I remember correctly. But the increments have already been made after we've added the invoice. So so that's how the deductions and additions are made in inventory. So the other thing on the inventory section are supplier payments. So when you come to first when you come to statements, if I want to take a look at the water supplier statement for today, it shows that there is a balance of 81,600 for this particular invoice. And when you come to purchase invoices, that's exactly what was received today for this invoice. So let's say we want to pay off maybe 50,000, for example. So when you come to supplier payments, we can add a payment to this guy of 50,000, and this was in cash, and we can say this was a part payment. When we save that, it will show you the supplier amount, how we paid them, and small remarks. So if you come back to the statement for this supplier, it will show you, so the system recognizes payments first and then purchases next. So you will notice that but the balance brought forward, there was nothing behind or before that, but it recognizes a payment prior to the day that the invoice was made. So which would be a debit. So by the time we got to this 81,000, the difference now is 31,000. So this is something you can generate in Excel and also probably just share it with the suppliers themselves. So just to keep everyone in sync on what's due on your side, so that you both have a really good picture of what your outstandings are. So in a nutshell, that's inventory, and I'll see you guys in the next one.